Greetings and welcome back to room 303 in our Talks with Walt, as we are calling our readings through the deathbed edition of Walt Whitman's Leaves of Grass. We turn now to a very interesting little poem sitting near the end of the drum tap section, "O Tan-Faced Prairie-Boy." Notice the stacking together of two hyphenated pairs of words. Now this is poem number 32 of the 43 of drum taps. I want to remind you that Whitman said into the old cause that my book and the war are one, and we've been asking as we hit every one of the drum taps poems, how does that one work? And I think it works very, very well in this poem for a whole lot of different reasons than any of the poems that have come before in the drum tap section. In fact, some of you will argue this is the one poem in drum tap so far that is so much different from all of the other poems. And in some ways it's going to remind us of an earlier poem that we will have already read and studied at learnstrong.net. Down that left-hand side, Talks with Walt. Do you remember that we messed around with a little poem to a stranger? It ran like this. "Passing stranger, you do not know how longingly I look upon you. You must be he I was seeking, or she I was seeking. It comes to me as of a dream. I have somewhere surely lived a life of joy with you. All is recalled as we flit by each other, fluid, affectionate, chaste, matured. You grew up with me, were a boy with me, or a girl with me. I ate with you and slept with you. Your bodies become not yours only, nor left my body mine only. You give me the pleasure of your eyes, face, flesh, as we pass. You take of my beard, breast, hands in return. I am not to speak to you, I am to think of you when I sit alone or wake at night alone. I am to wait, I do not doubt, I am to meet you again. I am to see to it that I do not lose you." Now, we pointed out when we studied this poem that stranger was also referenced in a song for occupations number 1, and we took a look already there at that set of lines. Now we're going to turn to a little poem that will have some pretty powerful resonances with to Stranger that we just read. Our Nortons will tell us about this poem that it remained in drum taps unchanged through all the editions. Now, why that? I mean, that's a little simple observation, but I think it's very important. Why it's important, again, has to do with the argument we've been making that Leaves of Grass is in fact a sustained theodicy. That is to say, why is there pain and suffering in the world? For example, in the drum tap section, why do we have to go through this horrific war? And there's a lot of answers to that that's been given. But one of the answers that's not yet really been given, but only gestured at, is what Whitman himself observed several times in his correspondence, that while it was the most horrific experience of his life to be a hospital nurse, that the young men, often even boys, that he met and that he said he loved was so compelling for him that it was an experience, the war, that he would be willing to do again. Now, we've pointed out that the war ruined his health and brought an early end to his life, many have argued, and certainly kind of tragically, the quality of his life at the end of his life because of some of the illnesses and the like that possibly he encountered during his experience of being with and around so many sick and dying. The poem, I think, reads remarkably simple and yet so complicated, so complex. "O tan-faced prairie boy, before you came to camp came many a welcome gift. Praises and presents came and nourishing food, till at last among the recruits you came, taciturn with nothing to give. We but looked on each other when, lo, more than all the gifts of the world, you gave me." Now, I find this just an amazing poem. And of course, a whole lot's been made of Whitman's sexuality. We've talked about it in earlier lectures. And to what degree was Whitman sexual at all, or asexual, or homosexual? And all of those kinds of observations obviously play in here beautifully. But let's just look at the poem to pay attention to what he means when he uses this word came, of course, a variation of the word come, the very first word, as we pointed out, of Leaves of Grass. And the idea of a gift. The theodicy, in other words. What is it that he says, I gained, me personally, I gained from the experience of working in field hospitals with all of these young men wounded and dying? And he begins by pointing out that the tan-faced we've seen elsewhere, the sunburned, the tan-faced, the brown-necked, all of that, right? The prairie boy, by the way, prairie gets used over 40 times in Leaves of Grass. So just think about that. Let that kind of lay for a second. In other words, Prairie Boy will emphasize that this young man that he meets is somewhat exotic, foreign. He comes from the prairie, from the West, if you will, from the country, and he's going to show up. Notice again, it's a boy, it's not young man. He says, before you came to camp, and by the way, notice that camp now is being used for interesting times. Before you came to camp came many a welcome gift. That is to say, there's all kinds of gifts that have come my way, which is, it's in itself kind of bizarre. This, by the way, tan-faced idea, we will see in I Sing the Body Electric, passage 3, if you want to run into ground. He says, many a welcome gift, and the idea then of a gift comes to mind. And obviously we think of something like gift of Magi, and the idea of Christ in the manger, and the Magi bringing gifts of gold, frankincense, myrrh. All of that comes to mind here in a poem like this. Praises and presents came, and it's unclear whether we're talking about Whitman giving or Whitman receiving. He argued, of course, that they were symbiotic. And nourishing food. Now, of course, this is wonderful because we're talking both quite literally. In fact, Whitman was a great purveyor of bringing ice cream to many of the lads who were ill and wounded and dying in the field hospitals. And to that degree, nourishing food. However, obviously, we can be speaking metaphorically here as well. The word till, of course, is the clinch word of the poem. Till at last among the recruits you came. And then the use of taciturn takes us back to Song for All Ships, the only other use of this word, right? In other words, to be kind of quiet, to be standoffish, right? In other words, shy, we might even say. With nothing to give. It's an interesting idea. And of course, I will say, of course, Whitman's audience, and the more educated of Whitman's audience, would recognize right away with this nothing to give, a line that, of course, comes from Shakespeare's King Lear at the very beginning with Cordelia, when she says nothing, and nothing comes of nothing. Notice here, nothing to give. In other words, the assumption here is that there's very little that this prairie boy shows up with. Maybe we're speaking about poverty or whatever. We might be talking about as well his shy nature. And then there's the dash, which we've seen so often in Leaves of Grass, especially in drum taps. It's almost now like amusing aside, an aside, if you will. We but looked on each other, and I've pointed this out several times already in Leaves of Grass. It's fun to read all of the poems of Leaves of Grass and then go back and begin to pay attention to the different ways that different words get used. I mean, we've been playing this game by looking back at earlier poems, like, for example, To a Stranger. The way that Whitman seems to be always talking about how he's an observer and how he's looking. Of course, the idea that somebody would look back at him, yes, and it's going to affect him in some way. The way we looked at each other, when lo, and we've seen this lo several times, it's a word of emphasis with an exclamation mark, more than all the gifts of the world you gave me. Now, many readers have pointed out, this line is not finished. I mean, take a look at it again. More than all the gifts of the world you gave me. I mean, it's almost as if an italic, some kind of ellipse should be there, right? To say, yeah, what exactly was given? And this is, to me, the brilliant silence of certain poems like this. This is can we call it a glimpse poem? It is. We've seen several of these in Leaves of Grass. I think Whitman is brilliant at it, where he kind of leads a certain type of anticipation for something to be shared. And as the great Harold Bloom, a great scholar, I believe, of Leaves of Grass, argued, Whitman's constantly promising how much he's going to reveal about himself, and he never does. It's like what keeps us reading again and again and again more poems to find out more about Whitman that never actually arrives. At 2a, what can we say here for a message or a theme? Well, I think one of the things that, and again, it's this theodicy of Whitman, this sustained theodicy, that love can be found in the most surprising ways, in the most surprising of places, even the most horrifying of places. Love can be found. Some have pointed out the possibility of seeing this with that lily-faced boy that we saw in an earlier poem in March Unknown. At 2B, I'm very interested in the repetition of came and the way in which came and the idea of gift are both utilized in this poem. And then, of course, as we pointed out, the brilliant way this poem ends with almost a mid-sentence of a kind, or a mid-thought, right? And the use of the word world, especially given the preceding poem, where I think Whitman's having a lot of fun with the use of the word world in the last two poems we've been working with. At 3A, I love to compare Whitman's poetry to Shakespeare, as I did with Lear, but I want to now go to Romeo and Juliet, and the idea that Romeo would show up looking for Rosaline at a party and for the first time see Juliet and say, she doth teach the torches to burn bright. And that moment of recognition, it's such a beautiful, brilliant moment, and I think Whitman is drawing on that tradition, no question. We could call it love at first sight or hope at first sight, whatever it would be, a gift at first sight. Finally, at 3B, it's an interesting question, and how do you own a poem like this? Have you ever had this experience where all it was a look, and maybe there was nothing else exchanged, but it was a gift? I hope that your study of Leaves of Grass continues to be that type of gift. Thank you.